were brothers once. Once.
Repaints and retools are pretty standard stuff for action figures. Why make a new mold for a character when you can just take a mold that already works and tweak it instead? That's just cost effective. Transformers is certainly no stranger to this, as many characters are recolors of each other with slight design tweaks. That's not a criticism, by the way, just an observation. Retooling can also be used for the same character, changing them into a different version of themselves. Which brings us to the subject of today's video, the Transformers Legacy United Fractured Friendship 2-pack. Or as I like to call it, the Toxic Yaoi 2-pack. I don't really think I need to explain that joke. If you're familiar with this franchise in any way, you'll probably get it. These two are retools of previously released versions of Optimus Prime and Megatron, Megatron being a minor one and Orion Pax being far more extensive. So let's take a look at these two and see how they stand up to their predecessors. Just as a note, I'm going to be using the names Orion Pax and Optimus Prime interchangeably, since this design was used both before and after he became the Autobot leader. With that all being said, let's get started. This Megatron mold has been used a lot over the past 6 years, but this guy specifically is a recolor of the Cybertronian Origins version, itself a retool of the original Siege Megatron. Those differences mainly show themselves in the robot mode. For now though, this color scheme comes from the IDW Megatron The Origin miniseries, showcasing his time as a gladiator. It's pretty close to Megatron's traditional color scheme, but there's just enough here to make this mode stand out from the previous versions, with the red paint highlights and parts that were previously black now being brown. It's an interesting choice to make, but it ends up working pretty well. What doesn't work that well though is vehicle cohesion. Megatron's alt mode is a tale of two halves. The original Siege version was a tank, but as IDW Megatron worked in the mines before the war and didn't get the fusion cannon until far later, what we get here is an attempt at a mining vehicle, with a drill head being where the tank cannon would be. The bottom half looks pretty nice, with good mechanical detail all around. The feet might be an eyesore for some, but I'm willing to give it a pass given the rest of the bottom half looks just fine. Plus, having the feet there lets me do this. Aw, look at him, he's shy. What I'm less willing to forgive though is the top half. See, the way Siege Megatron's tank mode worked was by having the fusion cannon work as the center, with the sword folding out to become the front half and attaching to it. This, along with the arms, created a solid, cohesive top. However, with this Megatron, the drill attaches to the handle of his pickaxe, which is far smaller than the fusion cannon. The end result is that the top half looks far too blatantly like a pair of arms with a drill sticking out of them. It's a shame, as had the handle been a bit bigger, I don't think this would have been an issue at all, but as it stands, I think the vehicle mode ends up being a bit of a step down from previous versions. Still, that doesn't mean it's terrible. The bottom half is still well done, the colors are still good, and while the top half is worse than before, it isn't outright heinous. It helps that it still has the turret functionality of the original, and it still looks good with other Decepticons. So in an overall sense, Megatron's vehicle mode is pretty decent, but it could also be a lot better. We've seen it be a lot better, and it would only take a few modifications, but c'est la vie. What we have is what we have, and what we have is fine enough, I guess. While it was pretty easy for me to see and talk about the issues with Megatron's alt mode, I'll admit that I struggle to really find any major problems with Orion Pax's. Pax here is an extensive retool of Studio Series Gamer Edition Optimus Prime, something that becomes abundantly clear when putting them next to each other. The transformation and overall engineering are the same, but the sculpt has been completely overhauled, turning this vehicle from a curved battering ram on wheels to a chunky brick on wheels. Pretty accurate to the source material to boot, but what really impresses me is the back section. Now, the back on the original Gamer Edition Prime was a major point of criticism, and I think you can plainly see why. The fists are right out in the open with nothing to cover them up. As much as I like this figure, this is an extremely glaring flaw. A flaw that doesn't exist with IDW Prime, whose retooling process has also included being able to split the feet in half, covering the hands and removing the only major flaw this car mode had. Sure, I could talk about some of the minor exposed parts, but those are so small that they barely even register. The only other thing that I have any real problem with is the color they used for the windshield. It's the same bright blue we saw in the Autobot 5-pack. I didn't care for it there, and I don't care for it here. But again, super minor criticism. This car mode on basically all fronts is great. It's sculpted really well. It fixes all the major problems that existed on the previous version of this mold and looks great alongside your Autobots. So as far as the vehicle modes are concerned, I think it's fairly clear which one I prefer. But obviously there's more to these guys than just that, so let's go and move into the transformations. Starting off with Megatron, let's remove the drill from its spot first. We can also take this time to flip out the fists as well. Moving on to the legs, let's start with straightening out the feet. Untab the legs from here, flip this section out, then rotate the thighs out of the shins, straighten it out, and close it back up. Same thing on the other side. Now, turn the waist around, untab these treads from the center, then push that centerpiece behind them. You can now pull this entire section up and then fold it down like so. That will give you clearance to tab the arms into the chest. Fold the tank treads in, and finally bring the entire section down. Take the drill off the axe handle, put it on his forearm, and then attach the tip of the axe to the handle. And that's Megatron fully done. Now for Optimus, we'll start similarly to Megatron by removing the exhausts. Let's take the bottom half of the feet and combine it with the top, untab the sides and top, go to the underside and untab the arms, then lift the legs up and out of the way. Flip the wheels around, bring the feet down, then tab everything else into the shins. You can also push these parts down as well. Separate the legs, and that's the bottom half done. Moving on, we just pull the arms out, rotate the body up, and then rotate the waist around. Untab the sides from the center, and then bring the center down and rotate it. Bring the chest to an upright position, flip the shoulder assemblies around, and collapse the center into its back, and then tab the sides into place. Finally, stick the exhausts into his arms, and that's Orion Pax finished. If you transform their predecessors, you won't be too surprised by their transformations. They're mostly the same with only minor changes with the feet for Prime. Still, they're surprisingly simple and fun to transform back and forth, so there will be no complaints from me here. These transformations are a complete treat. Now, while I found Megatron's alt mode to be a bit underwhelming, I have the complete opposite feelings about his robot mode. I already like this as a standard G1 Megatron, but the retooling here has done just a little bit more to make this truly fantastic. The changes here are a new head, shoulders, and chest, and while I could take or leave the shoulders, the new tooling for the chest is quite nice, complemented with the extra red at the abs. The extra red overall does a lot to add a bit of punch to this guy. In particular, the red X's on his chest are pretty reminiscent of the original toy details. Nice little touch. But of course, the best part of the retooling is the head sculpt. Based on the work of Alex Milne, this head is absolutely fantastic. Striking and intimidating with nice black paint. I know Megatron typically has a gray helmet like the rest of his body, and I do like that too, but man, does he rock a black helmet. He's also got some nice red highlights on the helmet as well. Kinda looks like he's got bloody tears, to be honest. Moving along though, the drill is again standing in for where the fusion cannon would traditionally go, and the pickaxe is now fully formed, with both looking rather nice. But that's just his mining gear. Remember, this is supposed to be Megatron when he was a gladiator. As such, he comes with weapons he used in issue 2 of his miniseries. They kind of suck. Okay, the sword isn't too bad, the flames are sculpted well enough, but it would have really benefited from having some extra paint, or the flames just being done in clear plastic. As for the Energon hammer, I mean, it looks more like chewed up gum on a stick than anything else. Rather disappointing, all things considered, but I'd rather have disappointing weapons than a disappointing figure. Besides, we still have the mining equipment as weapons, so it's not a complete loss on that front. As for articulation, it's pretty much what you'd expect. The War for Cybertron trilogy was when we started to get the current standard of articulation from retail Transformers, so Megatron basically has everything barring wrist swivels. That does mean we still have to contend with the flap the head sits on not actually locking in anywhere, and at least on my copy of the figure, the thigh and knee joints, aren't exactly the strongest. Not sure if this is just QC or the age of the mold, and they still hold poses well enough, but that doesn't mean they aren't pretty loose. Overall, though, Megatron's robot mode is pretty good. That probably isn't a surprise to most of you. We've gotten this Megatron mold at least 10 times prior, a point I'll come back to later, but still, the retooling does a decent job at keeping things feeling relatively fresh for this 6-year-old mold. While Megatron was still clearly the Siege mold, Orion is almost completely unrecognizable from the Studio Series version. Basically everything except for the thighs and lower torso have been resculpted, resulting in the figure looking remarkably accurate to Alex Milne's work on the whole. From the chest, to the shoulders, to the shins, and of course the head sculpt, it all looks fantastic. Gotta say, I really like the spot of silver on the head fins, really pops. Not to mention the black outlines on the eyes, they look so nice. Now, as this is a retool of Gamer Edition Prime, we also get everything he had. As such, Pax comes with his Ion Blaster. Looks nice in hand, but the handle itself looks a bit odd, doesn't it? You see, to be accurate to the games, GE Prime had the ability to remove his right forearm in order to use his gun. Obviously, this wasn't necessary with IDW Prime, so they added this handle so he could just hold it normally. It should be noted though that Orion still has the ability to remove his forearm, so if you wanted to, you could use the gun arm functionality and it doesn't look too bad. And as is custom with Optimus Primes at this point, he comes with the Matrix of Leadership. It is the exact same as the Gamer Edition one. You can also remove it if you want to, but I'm not going to bother. Still nice to have though. As for articulation, he's pretty much the same as Megatron, but with the addition of wrist swivels, so he'll be able to get into a variety of poses. Overall, what else is there to say? Orion Pax is simply a fantastic improvement over his predecessor in pretty much every way. Size comparison time, these two sit at around 17 centimeters each. Pax is actually slightly taller than GE Optimus thanks to the reworked feet, but overall these two will fit in just fine with the rest of your collection, being the standard height Optimus and Megatron have been for the past few years. Well, Studio Series 86 Prime notwithstanding anyway. I think it's very clear that I like these two, but recommending them is a bit more difficult than you might think. While I could say that you should get Orion Pax with no trouble whatsoever, I can't really say the same for Megatron, and that's not because he's bad, but because we've gotten at least 10 different versions of this mold in the past. And while I like what's been done here, I'm not sure if it's worth picking up if you've already gotten one of the previous ones. If you really like the Siege mold or don't have one yet, then absolutely, get this when you can. But if you already have a copy, I'd say give it a bit of thought, or maybe just consider trying to get Orion separately if you can. But that's all I've got to say about these guys. What do you think? Are these guys worth it to you? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Later!